Part 2 Alien Girl asking in what way you f **k me I can't sit down after last night. The lighting aboard Nova's warship was always sharp clinical, designed for focus not comfort, but this morning it cut deeper than usual. A cold white beam slashed across the dark walls of her private quarters, illuminating every sharp line of her posture, every subtle tremor in her clenched jaw. She stood motionless near the observation panel, arms folded behind her back, her silhouette rigid against the endless sprawl of stars, the universe outside shimmered with indifference behind her. Blake sat on the edge of the low, wide bed sheets half draped over his waist, his broad shoulders bare and marked with faint iridescent traces of her touch scars that shimmered faintly in the alien light. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands over his face. The silence felt engineered, manufactured, a vacuum that pressed against his ribs. Nova didn't turn. You didn't understand a thing, did you? Her voice was low-laced with restraint, but not calm. Not this time. Blake's head lifted. He searched the back of her shoulders, tense, spine perfectly straight, hair swept up in a warrior's knot. Nova, I look if this is about last night. She pivoted sharply, her pale eyes burning with violet fire met his, and for the first time since he'd met her, he couldn't read the emotion in them. Not fury, not coldness, something deeper, something raw. Last night was a ceremony, she said slowly, an offering not just of body but of bond. I opened something sacred to you. She stepped forward. The soft metallic hiss of her boots against the floor sounded louder than his heartbeat. You treated it like a conquest, she said. Blake stiffened. The accusation hit harder than any battle wound. I thought, don't say you thought it was just sex, she snapped, eyes narrowing. You're not that stupid, Blake. His jaw clenched. Her words weren't cruel for cruelty's sake, they were precise, surgical, but they cut all the same. She stopped 2 feet from him, the air between them thick with heat, but none of it the kind they'd shared hours ago. I didn't ask for your devotion, she continued, her voice softer, now almost dangerous in its quiet. I asked for presence, attention. You were inside me, Blake, but you weren't with me. The way she said it made the muscles in his chest tighten. He could still feel her from the night before, her strength, her hunger, the way her hands had held him, as if memorizing the texture of his skin. But now he realized he hadn't held her the same way. He'd been chasing a high, she'd been giving him something far more costly. I didn't know, he said finally. No one told me what that meant for your kind. Nova tilted her head. So because no one told you, you didn't think to ask. Silence. Blake stood, the sheet falling away, revealing more than just bare skin. There was vulnerability in his stance, now the first flicker of shame. You're right, she didn't look away. You carry that gun like you understand power. But in here, she tapped her own chest, fingers led above her breastbone. You're still unarmed. His mouth parted to respond, but nothing came. Her words rang through him louder than battle alarms. Her eyes dropped briefly to the fatting imprint of her fingers on his skin. There was a softness there, brief, vanishing. You moaned my name like it meant something to you, she said, her voice low, as if confessing to herself, and I believed it. Blake stepped forward instinctively, one hand reaching out, whether to touch her arm or offer an apology. Even he didn't know. Nova didn't move away, but she didn't move closer. She looked up at him, something like disappointment etched beneath her anger. I don't give my body to humans for the thrill of it, Blake. I chose you because I believed you saw me. Not just the general, not the alien me. He felt the words pressing against his ribs, each one deliberate, like she was constructing a weapon from them. Nova stepped back, spine unbending with militant grace. You said nothing when I opened my soul to you. You just took and left me empty. Blake's mouth was dry. It wasn't like that. I didn't mean to. Intentions don't protect hearts, she said simply. Actions do. Outside the ship hummed beneath their feet, a silent reminder that the war still moved even while they stood at a standstill. Nova's Communicator flashed red on the wall behind her. She didn't move to answer it. Blake lowered his hand. What now? Her eyes lingered on him for a long beat, searching. Then, with a whisper of cloth and armor, she turned away. Now, she said, we return to battle, and you learn the difference between touching someone and reaching them. She didn't look back. The door slid open with a hiss of pressurized air, and as she stepped into the corridor, Blake remained still. Naked, wounded in ways no medbay could fix, and finally aware that last night hadn't been a victory. The silence that followed Nova's exit stretched into the sterile corners of the room, thick and suffocating. Blake sat alone now, elbows braced on his knees, the cool air licking at his bare back where her touch had once lingered. The sheets beneath him were still tangled, carrying the faint, metallic, sweet scent of her skin. He had never seen her like that before, not in battle, not in diplomacy, not even in the quiet, guarded moments that had slowly drawn him in. Nova had always been an unshakable force, strategic, eloquent, impossible to intimidate. But this morning she looked at him not as a soldier or an adversary. She had looked at him as a woman betrayed. She gave me something I didn't know how to hold. The thought clawed at him. There was no armor thick enough to block that kind of regret. He stood slowly, each movement deliberate, as if gravity itself weighed more than usual. He moved toward the mirror on the far wall, polished obsidian framed in brushed chrome, its reflection cool and unforgiving. What stared back at him wasn't the combat-hardened Marine who had survived Earth's last war. It was a man who had misunderstood the very thing he'd been aching for since arriving on the ship. Connection. He pressed his palm against the mirror, jaw tight. How could I miss it? He remembered the way her fingers had moved over his chest the night before, not with urgency but reverence, not possession but invitation. Her breath had matched his. Her eyes hadn't just looked at him, they had searched, questioned, waited, and he had closed his eyes, not out of surrender but escape. Blake dragged a hand through his short, sweat-dried hair. His skin still burned with the aftermath of her touch, but beneath the sensation a hollowness pulsed. It wasn't guilt alone, it was the realization that he had mistaken meaning for momentum. You were inside me, Blake, but you weren't with me. He could still hear her voice, crystalline and edged like tempered glass. It hadn't been anger that fractured her, it had been disappointment, deeper than rage, more intimate than blame. He reached for his uniform, folded neatly on the side table, a courtesy Nova had given him before she left. The fabric was smooth, woven with adaptive nano fibers, but it felt heavier in his hands now, less like protection and more like penance. As he pulled the suit over his body, sealing the chest plate, Blake replayed every moment from the night before with painful precision. The way she had looked at him, not as a general choosing a subordinate, but as a soul reaching for another. Her restraint had been intentional, her control fluid. She hadn't just wanted pleasure, she had offered depth, resonance, connection, and he had skimmed across the surface like a coward, mistaking her surrender for submission. I was blind, he muttered, jaw locking. His voice sounded hoarse in the empty room. He crossed to the bedside console, tapping into the ship's internal comms. Her name was highlighted in red, Nova VR03. His finger hovered over the panel, but he didn't press it. What would I even say? I'm sorry that I didn't know, that I didn't mean to leave her feeling used. The words felt brittle in his throat. She wouldn't want excuses, she wouldn't accept ignorance as currency. He moved away from the panel, packing his boots thudded softly against the floor. The sound rhythmic, almost meditative. A memory surfaced, Nova's voice from weeks ago when they first trained side by side during the ambush on the Deltara moon. Your people touch quickly, but you rarely stay. He had laughed at the time. We just move fast. Speed doesn't mean depth, she'd replied, looking past him. It only means distance, covered before you disappear. He hadn't understood then, but he did now. Blake sat down again, staring at the floor, his chest ached not with longing, but with the sharp sting of realization. He hadn't just disappointed her, he had Wasted a moment she had crafted with precision and intention. He remembered the way her breath hitched when he touched the curve of her lower back, how she had stilled just for a second as if she were giving him a part of herself that couldn't be taken back, and he had brushed past it thinking it was just a reaction, a shiver in the dark, but it hadn't been that, it had been her bearing. A part of herself most of her kind wouldn't reveal even under oath, and he had missed it. He ran both hands down his face. How do I fix this? No apology would erase what she felt, but silence would rot it even further. He needed to understand more than just what he'd done. He had to learn why it had mattered, what intimacy meant to her species, not just physically but spiritually, culturally. And not for her sake alone, for his own, because for the first time in years he felt the absence of something more than flesh. He felt the absence of her. The console buzz suddenly pulling him back, an incoming transmission, not from Nova, but from the bridge. General Nova has requested immediate personnel deployment to the weapons bay. Enemy scans have been detected. He stood at once, body snapping into soldier mode, but his thoughts remained elsewhere, locked in the space between her eyes and his guilt. Duty first, then clarity, then maybe a way back to her if she'd still have him. The observation deck was nearly silent save for the low harmonic hum of the ship's power core beneath the floor. Through the domed glass, space sprawled infinitely. Endless unblinking stars burning across the void. Nova stood at the edge of it, all her arms crossed behind her back, chin lifted as though daring the universe to answer a question she hadn't spoken aloud. She wore less armor tonight, just the dark-hued bodysuit, seamless and tight against the contours of her frame, the gleam of her pale blue skin catching the light, and quiet pulses. Her hair, always so precisely coiled in command, now flowed freely over her shoulders. Long dark strands with silver-threaded accents glitting softly like stardust caught in silk. Blake approached from behind, his stride slower than usual. He hadn't been summoned, he'd come because something in him told him she would be here, and because he'd been thinking about her far too much since the last mission. She didn't turn. You walk heavily, she murmured. Humans always do. Like the ground needs to remember them. He gave a crooked smile, stopping a few steps away. Maybe we just want to be noticed. Nova's lips curved slightly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. You were noticed, Blake, since the moment you stepped onto my ship. He felt a warmth in his chest at that, but it came tangled with something else, something quieter. She still hadn't looked at him. I thought you might be sleeping, he said. I don't sleep the way your kind does, she replied. Not when something is unresolved. The air between them thickened. Blake stepped closer. The stars lit her profile, now high cheekbones, a strong, elegant jaw, and eyes that shimmered with unreadable depth. I didn't come to talk about the mission, he said finally. I know. Silence fell again, but this one wasn't hollow. It vibrated with possibility, heavy with unspoken questions. Slowly, deliberately, Nova turned to face him. Her gaze swept over his face as if assessing not his appearance but his readiness. She stepped forward, not hesitant, not uncertain, but controlled, always in command. Yet there was something tender in the way she reached for him, fingers brushing lightly along the edge of his jaw. Blake's breath caught. She leaned in, not for a kiss, but to rest her forehead against his. It was a gesture her species reserved for intimacy, something he'd learned weeks ago but never expected to receive. Do you know what this means? She asked quietly. He nodded, but his throat tightened. He didn't know all of it. No. Yet her voice softened. Then don't lie to me. Their mouths found each other with a slow burning hunger. Her lips were warmer than he expected, plush and firm, responding to his with a precision that felt rehearsed but not mechanical. She kissed as if she were memorizing him, as if each touch meant something permanent. He felt her hands slide down his back, deliberate and strong, pulling him closer until every inch of her pressed into him. His breath shuddered as he responded, instinctively wrapping his arms around her waist, tugging her flush against his. Body they moved with gravity slow, irresistible, drawn by something deeper. Then chemistry, she broke the kiss, eyes searching his face. Undress me, Blake. Hesitated not because he didn't want to, but because of how she said it. There was no lust in her voice, there was trust, vulnerability. He obeyed carefully. Undoing the clasps at her shoulders, peeling the bodysuit down her frame with reverence, her skin beneath was radiant. Smooth and marked by fine lines of light that traced her collar bones, her hips, her ribs, natural bioluminescence that pulsed with each breath she took. Nova stood still beneath his hands, watching his face the entire time. When she stepped free of the fabric, it pulled at her feet, forgotten. Her fingers went to his shirt next, and she pulled it over his head with fluid grace. Her palms traced the muscles of his chest, not with urgency but curiosity. Her touch wasn't claiming, it was discovering. They lay down together, skin against skin, breath catching in unison. She guided him onto the soft interface mat beside the deck's glass wall, where the stars offered quiet witness as their bodies joined. Blake gasped, unprepared for the intensity of sensation. It wasn't just heat or pressure, it was something that moved beneath the skin, a pulsing sync between them, biological and intimate. Nova's species shared energy through physical union, something he had heard rumors of but never truly believed. His body throbbed with it now. Nova arched into him, her hands gripping his shoulders, but her eyes, gods, her eyes never looked away. She moaned his name softly, not as a sound of pleasure but invocation, as if calling him into something far beyond the physical, and he had met it with desire, with drive but not with understanding. He pressed into her harder, seeking depth through motion rather than meaning. He didn't notice the way her breath caught, not from pleasure but pause. He missed the flicker of sadness behind her lashes when he turned her body without asking. The moment he chose rhythm over communion. Nova never stopped him, but her voice, when it returned, the end had changed, softer, thinner. She whispered his name again, but this time it was a question, not a cry. He came with a force that left him shaking, collapsing against her. Breath ragged, and she held him, but she didn't speak. Now, hours later, he could see the difference, could feel it, like a bruise under the skin. She hadn't wanted performance, she had wanted recognition, and he had offered her intensity, not intimacy. The warships corridor stretched ahead, linear and unfailing, bathed in faint blue light, pulsing along the walls with a steady rhythm. Nova walked without hesitation, her footfall silent, measured. She had changed, her battle armor fitted seamlessly to her form once more, no trace of softness left in her silhouette. Her jaw was set, her gaze forward, unblinking. Blake followed several paces behind, still pulling on the last of his gear. He hadn't spoken since leaving her quarters, and now, watching the way her shoulders squared with every step, he wasn't sure he could. The woman ahead of him no longer moved like the one who had whispered his name into the dark. When she turned into the weapons bay, the door slid shut behind them with a quiet thud. The air in the room was cooler, clinical. It smelled faintly of charged metal and recycled oxygen. Nova moved to the central console and began tapping a sequence, eyes fixed on the holographic interface. She didn't acknowledge his presence. He stepped closer, slow. Nova, speak only if it's mission related. Her tone sliced through the room, unyielding. Blake stopped. You said something this morning that I left you empty. His voice was low, careful. I didn't know that's how it felt for you. I didn't want that. She turned toward him slowly, no fire in her expression this time, just exhaustion that settled behind her eyes like dust that wouldn't be brushed away. You keep saying what you didn't know, she said, voice quieter now, but not once have you asked what it meant, not once have you tried to understand why. Blake's mouth opened, then closed. There was no easy defense, and they both knew it. Nova stepped toward him, stopping only inches away, close enough for him to smell the subtle metallic scent of her skin, to see the faint silver light veining across her neck, glowing slightly beneath the surface. I let you inside a part of myself my kind doesn't share casually, She said, what we did, it's not recreation for us, it's recognition, a ritual of unity, a bond meant to be respected, not consumed. Blake lowered his gaze. Her words carried no theatrics, no dramatics, only truth. I thought we were sharing something, he said, barely audible. You were taking something, Nova replied, and I was giving. I waited for you to feel it, to meet me there. She paused, something flickering in her expression, an ache barely concealed, then it vanished beneath her discipline. But you didn't. She finished. He looked at her now, really looked at the slight hollowness in her cheeks, the tightness in her mouth that hadn't been there last night. Regret coiled in his stomach, heavier than guilt, heavier than any physical wound he'd carried. I wish I could go back, he admitted. Nova shook her head. You can't, not because of time, but because what you failed to see the first time will never be the same when you look again. Silence followed, not cruel, just inevitable. She turned her back to him, pulling up a star map on the console. We're being flanked by V-Thari scouts. I've authorized 3 intercept ships to engage. I'll lead the 4th. I'll go with you, Blake said quickly. Nova didn't turn. I didn't ask. I want to stand beside you, not just for the fight. She froze for a breath, then she spoke, each word precise. You want to stand beside me now because you're afraid of what you've already lost. That's not the same as understanding me. His chest rose, fell. He didn't argue. She was right. He watched her shoulders, the way they held so much tension, so much silence. He wanted to reach out again, but the truth gripped him harder than the urge. Touching her now would feel like theft. She began inputting commands. Her voice, once velvet-wrapped and intimate, was now clipped with military precision. Suit up. Your presence is required on the second wing. Follow protocol, nothing more. Nova, he tried again, softer. She turned back to him slowly, and this time her eyes didn't burn, they shimmered, and for a moment he saw the ghost of the woman who had held him the night before. Not a warrior, not a commander, just a woman who had offered something whole, and had it returned fractured. I would have bled for you, she whispered. I would have let your breath fill the space between my hearts, but now I don't even want your apology. I want distance. It landed like a blow, but Blake didn't flinch. He stood there, stripped every way but uniform. Her eyes lingered on him for just a second longer, then she turned away, walking toward the launch bay without another word, and this time she didn't wait for him to follow. The moment the emergency sirens activated, the shift in the warship's energy was immediate. Gone was the heavy stillness that had filled the air between them, now replaced by alert status tones echoing down the corridors, red lights flashing in rhythmic urgency along the walls. Blake's body moved before his mind caught up, training over road turmoil. Inside the weapons bay, Nova's fingers danced across the console, bringing up holographic schematics of the ship's perimeter. Her face was locked in focus, every movement smooth, deliberate. The soft glow of tactical readouts washed over her skin, turning her into a figure carved from light and war. Whatever grief remained in her, she buried it beneath the cold efficiency of a commander enemy. Scouts have breached the asteroid barrier, 2 wings, likely V-Thari vanguard ships. Her voice rang out crisp and resolute. We're not at full shield capacity. Hull integrity has already dropped by 6%. Blake moved to the side panel, securing his gauntlets. Voice taut. Why didn't we detect them earlier? They're cloaked with refractive ion fields. Our scans weren't tuned to pick up the frequency, Nova replied without glancing at him. They've adapted. The floor shuddered beneath them, a low jarring vibration that rippled through the steel like the echo of a distant growl. The ship's outer plating groaned as another blast struck their forward shield. Sparks burst from a junction overhead. Nova's gaze snapped toward the launch tubes. To your craft. You'll lead a flanking maneuver from the right. I'm taking the direct front. Blake's stomach twisted, not out of fear for the fight, but for her. She wasn't choosing danger, she was diving into it. You shouldn't take point, he said. You're too valuable to risk in open combat. She met his eyes. Then this isn't about value, it's about strategy. I Lead from the front always. There was no room to argue the woman who had stood beside him in the dark bare and searching was now armor-bound and immovable. She didn't need his defense. She'd never asked for it. The ship jolted again, this time harder warning systems flared across the interface. They had less than 90 seconds before the Vithari breached the outer hull of the port side. Without another word, Nova turned and strode toward the launch chamber. Her stride was long, powerful, cloak trailing behind her like a shadow of authority. Blake followed her out of the weapons bay, the adrenaline forcing his earlier guild into the background. They passed other officers racing to their stations, and no one dared their commander, not now. Inside the launch prep chamber, ambient lighting dimmed as the blast shields retracted from the ship's hangar through the wide viewport. The stars now shimmered in the distance, interrupted by the rapid movement of approaching enemy crafts, sleek, angular, and jet black, trailing plasma like spectral tails. Nova's assault vessel, sleek, matte gray with twin turbines already pulsing, awaited at the end of the bay. She didn't pause. A crew member offered her a last-minute check. She dismissed it with a glance. Blake broke his silence. Nova, wait. She turned halfway, helmet in hand, her features cast in shadows. He swallowed. Don't let this be about punishing yourself. Her eyes narrowed. You think this is penance? I think you're going into that fight like you don't care what happens. Nova stepped close enough that he could see the ghost of blue veins flickering along her throat, her breath, even despite the rising tension. I do care, Blake. I care about protecting this ship, these people, this mission that has always come first. Don't confuse your guilt with my purpose. Blake looked at her, jaw tight. Just come back. A pause. Then she said quietly, we all come back different. With that, she sealed her helmet and stepped into the cockpit of her vessel. The hatch hissed closed. Her ship detached seconds later, launching into the black with a sudden burst of propulsion that left a shimmering trail in its wake. Blake turned toward his own craft, urgency replacing hesitation. He sprinted across the hangar and climbed into the fighter, sealing the cockpit with practiced ease. As his vessel lifted from the launch bay, the full battle spread out before him, streaks of laser fire, distant explosions blooming like electric flowers, and the guttural vibration of Vithari plasma cannons firing in rhythm. Nova's ship was already engaging two of the enemy crafts, directly maneuvering with surgical precision. Her flying was as deliberate as her words, every swerve, every counter fire calculated to pin the enemy against the ship's blind spot. Blake adjusted his course to flank left, catching another scout in the arc of his forward cannons. He fired. The blast struck clean metal, peeled back in a burst of orange and white, the enemy vessel imploding before its pilot could eject. Target down, he muttered into his comms, pursuing secondary coordinates. Vector 7 Alpha. Confirmed, came Nova's voice through the channel. Steady despite the chaos. Maintain sweep pattern. Do not engage the heavy class cruiser. I'll handle it. She's charging plasma banks, one of the lieutenants called across the fleet channel. We don't have enough shield power for another direct hit. I said, I'll handle it. Nova's tone cut through the chatter like a blade. Blake swerved sharply, locking onto another scout that had broken formation and was veering toward the ship's underbelly. He fired twice, the second blast catching the wing and sending the vessel into a spin before it disintegrated against the ship's shielding. His eyes scanned the display. Nova's ship was accelerating toward the Vatari heavy class alone. Nova, what are you doing? Blake demanded, his voice sharp. Ending this. Her craft stree across the starfield, dodging plasma bursts, the hull glowing red-hot from friction in proximity to enemy fire. Then suddenly she disappeared behind the enemy's bulk. Nova respond a beat, then a flash of violent, blinding bloom of blue-white light erupted where the enemy ship had hovered, consuming it entirely. The shock wave rippled through the void, rattling Blake's fighter as the energy pulse expanded outward like a wave Crashing in silence, visual on enemy cruiser, neutralized, a voice crackled. Over the comms, but Blake wasn't listening. He scanned the screen, no trace of her ship. Nova, he breathed. Nova. Respond, silence, then static, then her voice, hoarse, quiet, but alive. Secondary. Thrusters gone, manual control, returning to ship. Relief struck him like a punch. He exhaled for the first time in minutes. She was alive, but when he looked out into the dark, searching for her ship. Limping back toward them, something in him twisted. She might have survived the fire, but something else had burned away. And he didn't know if it could be recovered. The docking clamps hissed as Nova's damaged assault vessel was pulled into the hangar bay under emergency override. Sparks trailed from her left thruster, scorched plating curling at the edges. The outer hull was blackened, the insignia barely visible beneath melted alloy. Inside the cockpit, Nova remained still, her fingers resting lightly on the manual steering grip. Smoke drifted from the console, and her breathing, though steady, was shallow. Measured her body, arced from the impact. Her side was bruised where the harness had bitten into her ribs, but pain wasn't new to her. It wasn't even relevant. The hangar lights blazed back to full intensity. A crew rushed forward with extinguishers and a medical team in tow, but she raised a hand, palm out. Not now, she said, voice clipped. Secure the hull, leave the rest. Before they could argue, another fighter landed beside hers. Blake's, his canopy opened with a sharp hiss. He leapt down before the hydraulic lift had even touched the floor. Nova had just descended from her own craft boots, hitting the deck with a metallic thud. Their eyes locked across the bay for a moment. Nothing else existed, not the frantic mechanics, not the alarms still echoing faintly through the walls, just the scorched air between them and the things still left unsaid. He crossed the space between them in 4 long strides. You were nearly incinerated, he said, stopping inches from her. His voice was tense, raw. I wasn't, she replied, calmly brushing soot from her arm. That's not the point. Nova looked up at him, eyes unreadable behind the residual glare of emergency lighting. You think I didn't calculate the risk? You calculated it, Blake said, but you didn't care what it cost you. She stepped back, not far, just enough to keep distance. I care about surviving the war. That's my job. His gaze dropped to the charred plating of her shoulder guard. And if your job kills you, Nova turned toward the far doors, already striding toward the internal elevator. Then I die fulfilling it. Blake didn't follow at first. He stood there, fists clenched at his sides, jaw flexing as the heat from the battle still surged through him. But something in her voice, the way she said it like it meant nothing, moved through him like a deeper kind of fire. She didn't need saving, she never had, but that didn't mean she didn't need someone. He caught up with her just as the elevator door slid open. Without a word, he stepped inside. She didn't stop him. They rode in silence, both still in partial armor, both reeking of scorched metal and lingering plasma residue. Their bodies shared the same square of space, close enough to touch, but both stood rigid when the doors opened to the corridor leading to command deck. Delta. Nova stepped out. Blake followed, but this time not like a shadow. You think I don't understand what last night meant to you, he said quietly, walking beside her now, his voice steady. But I do, maybe not all of it, maybe not the way your kind would, but I felt something. She didn't slow. Feeling something and respecting it aren't the same, I know, he said, almost a whisper. But I wasn't numb. I wasn't careless, I was afraid. That made her pause. She turned to face him, her expression tight, but her gaze softer than before, afraid of what it would mean if it wasn't just physical. Blake admitted, of what I'd owe you, of what it would open inside me. Nova studied him, not with accusation, but with the kind of focus that stripped people bare. Her voice was lower now. You thought I was offering obligation, not connection. He nodded. And that's on me, but I don't want to keep running from what you gave me. The corridor dimmed as the ship shifted to recovery protocol. Outside, the reinforced window to their left space glowed with the fatting aftershock of battle debris drifting silently. Enemy Wreckage trailing stardust like torn veils. Nova turned to the window. Her reflection visible against the glass, silver glints in her hair, faint bruising beneath her armor, the quiet exhaustion in her shoulders. You were reckless out there, Blake said after a long silence. Voice quieter, and it had nothing to do with strategy. You wanted to disappear into the fight. She didn't deny it. I couldn't reach you, he continued. Not in that cockpit, not earlier this morning, not even during the battle. I kept watching you throw yourself forward, and all I wanted to do was pull you back. Her eyes moved to his, slow and deliberate. Then why didn't you? His hand lifted before he could second guess himself. Fingers brushed her shoulder, the touch feather light, asking for permission rather than taking it. She didn't pull away. I thought I lost the right, he said. Nova's voice was nearly inaudible. You didn't lose it, you just never knew what it was. They stood like that, unmoving, wordless, until the air between them shifted again, not with tension this time, but with something more fragile. Blake stepped closer. I'm not asking to erase what I did. I know I hurt you, but I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Nova's gaze lingered on him, searching. She reached up slowly, gloved fingers brushing against the edge of his jaw. You don't get to touch me and mean nothing by it again. I won't, he said. Not ever again. Her hand dropped. Then prove it. Not here, not with words. The calm in her ear chirped. General Nova, command wants final sweep confirmation in Sector 8. She tapped the receiver. On my way then, too. Blake, eyes steady, voice cool but no longer distant. Suit up, we're clearing the last outpost together. No longer an order, an invitation. As she walked ahead, he followed, not out of guilt or command, but because something had finally shifted. This time they would fight side by side, not just in battle but in whatever came after. The aftermath of the final sweep brought a hush to the ship that hadn't been felt in weeks. For the first time since the Vithari siege began, the stars outside the warship's hull burned undisturbed. No flashes of enemy plasma, no tremors beneath the decks, just silence. Nova stood in the upper observation deck, once more, arms folded loosely, the projection of the recovered sectors flickering in slow rotations above her head. Her armor was gone, replaced by a soft black tunic fitted cleanly against her body, simple, free of insignia. It made her seem less untouchable. Blake entered quietly, not out of fear but respect. He stopped a few feet from her, but this time he didn't wait for her to acknowledge him. He stepped beside her and mirrored her stance, shoulders back, eyes on the galaxy. She didn't speak, neither did he. Minutes passed like that, not awkward but full. It was Nova who finally broke the silence. We recovered 8 escape pods from the debris, 4 from the cruiser. Her voice was level, but softer than command mode. Blake nodded, still watching the stars. And we didn't lose anyone on our side. That's a win. It is. Another pause. Nova's hand moved, resting lightly on the edge of the glass. You handled yourself well today. His gaze flicked to her face. You mean I didn't get myself killed? She smirked faintly, a low bar, but yes, you did more than survive. He turned toward her, one arm resting on the panel beside hers. Nova, I meant what I said. She didn't respond right away, but her eyes, so often hard, unyielding, were now gentled by something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but openness. She turned to him. Why did you come back to this deck? Blake gave a small breath of a laugh. Because I didn't want you to be alone with the stars again. Her eyes widened slightly, not dramatically, just enough that he knew the words landed. Connection, he said quietly, not conquest. She tilted her head. You're learning, slowly and probably clumsily, but yes. He stepped a little closer. Their arms nearly touched. She didn't step away. I thought the battlefield would be the hardest place to reach you, he murmured, but it was here when you weren't fighting, when you were just you. That's what I missed. Nova's fingers curled around the edge of the glass. Her voice was quieter now, and it trembled just barely. I gave you something I hadn't given anyone in decades, and when you didn't see it, I thought. She broke off, jaw tightening. I thought maybe I'd misjudged everything. Blake reached out slowly, carefully, and placed his hand Over her's warm skin against cool fingers, no pressure, just presence I didn't see. It then he said, but I see it now. Nova's lips parted, she didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she laced her fingers with his, closing that last space between them. Will you let me try again? He asked, not just tonight, for as long as it takes. Her answer wasn't verbal. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead gently to his. No armor, no masks, just skin against skin. A gesture of her kind, a right of truth, and he understood it now. His hands slid around her waist, holding her without force. Nova closed her eyes, resting against him, not because she needed to be held, but because she chose to let him hold her. She pulled back a fraction, just enough to look into his eyes. You're not afraid anymore, he smiled, still terrified, but not of you. They stayed like that, with the galaxy just beyond the glass and the weight of battles, both internal and external, finally beginning to fall away. Later they lay together in her quarters, not tangled in urgency, but resting in the stillness they'd both earned. No words, just breathing. Her fingers traced slow, silent lines over his chest, and his thumb brushed the inside of her wrist in answer. This time, he didn't rush. He listened to the rhythm of her breath, to the subtle shifts in her body, to the quiet ways she asked to be seen, and she let him in fully and freely. What had once been misalignment was now understanding, a scarred, strange, beautiful beginning. End of story.